Chapter 24, The Grand Review. Blue hung around the twins' room for almost an hour that night, hoping to convince Ida that she was their best and only chance. When Jenna finally tossed him out, he called through the door, "Maybe the gerbils can't tell the two of you apart. You're twins. Maybe they're colorblind." Jenna opened the door and pointed at him. "The gerbellion know their own mother. Now go to bed!" She slammed it in his face. "Harsh," said Howard. He had just come up the stairs carrying a gallon jug full of chocolate milk under one brawny arm. Instead of turning into his own room, he followed Blue up the steps to the third floor. "You're not allowed in the attic," Blue informed him, with a glance back over his shoulder. "Since you won't share your room, it's only fair." "Hey! I helped clean the attic, remember?" "Your doorknob electrocuted me." "You keep mentioning that," said Howard. He looked like he was holding back a grin. "I'm not going to the attic anyway. I'm heading to the bathroom. All the other showers are full." "Still?" It's funny how you get used to things so quickly, he thought, when they parted ways at the top of the stairs. Compared to everything else going on in the house, Howard drinking chocolate milk in the shower almost seemed ordinary. That night, Blue couldn't turn his brain off. He was excited about the plan he and Tumble had come up with, and he was upset that the phone call with his dad had gone wrong. His grandmother had been angry, just like his dad predicted. What was it she'd said? After what happened last time? Was she worried about accidents? Blue's dad had never been hurt. Alan Montgomery cruised right past Rex on the track. Blue rolled over and stared at the paint-splattered poster taped to the tower of boxes. He could hear the air conditioner blowing through the floor vent. He could smell lemon cake from the last time he'd burned Ida's candle. He didn't feel so lonely up here, knowing that Tumble and his cousin had tried to make the place cheerful. Finally, he closed his eyes and drifted off to sleep. Slam! Blue's eyes snapped open. At first, he wasn't sure what had woken him, and then the sound came again. And again. Banging noises were coming from downstairs. As he listened, the sound moved up through the house. On the second story, it was still muffled, but then it reached the third. Blue rolled off his mattress and pressed his ear to the floorboards. He could hear a hinge shriek, and then a slam. Slam! Slam! Voices were chattering, and there was a question in their tones that he couldn't quite make out. Then he heard feet pounding down the stairs. Blue was tempted to stay up in his attic and let whatever new madness this was go on without him. But then he reconsidered. What if some especially ill-fated cousin had caused a tornado to touch down? What if Greg, the fire-starting guy, had decided to sleep inside tonight, and now the house was in flames? Blue threw off his sheets, grabbed his duffel bag, and hurried downstairs. At first, he thought something must have happened to Mom Myrtle. Her time hadn't run out, but with every single person in the house trying to crowd into her bedroom, he couldn't imagine what else it might be. But then, over the hubbub, Cousin Chelsea shouted so loudly that her hair rollers shook. "Quiet, y'all! Our darling, wise, and beloved matriarch is making an announcement." The announcement? Wondered Blue. She couldn't mean. The Montgomerys pushed in closer, trampling on one another's bunny slippers, knocking eyeglasses off of faces and dental retainers out of mouths. "Oh, Mom Myrtle, you look awfully young for a 97-year-old. Did I tell you about how I'm going to name my firstborn Myrtle? Boy or girl? It's such a gorgeous name." Blue dropped his bag and stood on his tiptoes, but he couldn't catch a glimpse of his great-grandmother. He did spot Howard in the middle of the group, pushing his way through the relatives. Nobody was moving for him, but it didn't matter. He was using his bulky shoulders like battering rams, and he didn't mind throwing an elbow or two in the direction of the more terrible family members. Ida stumbled out of the crowd and into Blue. Her rainbow hair was sticking up in all directions, and her purple pajamas were rumpled. "They've shoved me right out of the room." Without waiting for a reply, she turned on her bare heels and ran toward the entryway. Blue, hoping she had a plan, followed. They dashed out the front door and around the other side of the house. When they jumped off the porch, the grass was wet with dew underfoot. Blue didn't have long to wonder about where they were going. Ida stopped just outside Ma Myrtle's bedroom window. They stood on top of a coiled garden hose to see what was happening inside. Ma Myrtle was there, standing on the seat of an armchair so that she could see over the pack of Montgomerys pressing in around her. Is she going to tell everyone how to find Munch? Blue asked. He wondered if he should go get dressed or call Tumble. What if it was tonight? The moon was due to be a waning sickle, according to the calendars, but it hadn't risen yet. He shifted his weight on the top of the hose and wished he could hear what was going on. Can you open the window? Maybe. Ida hunched over for a moment, and when she straightened, she had a garden trowel in her hand. If it's not locked, I think I can. She dug the tip of the trowel under the window, ignoring the fact that the metal was biting into the painted wood. When she had it in place, she balled up her fist and brought it down on the handle. Once, twice, the window lifted just enough for the two of them to make out the din from inside. By the way, Ida said, watch out for the bats, and possums, and raccoons. Raccoons are the worst. I had to have rabies shots the last time one got me. She looked down at her feet. And I didn't have time to put on my snake boots. I'll keep them away from you if I see any, Blue promised. They listened as hard as they could, and finally the relatives quieted enough for them to pick out Ma Myrtle's voice. I'm sure you don't like being woken up at 3 in the morning, she said, holding a hand over her chest like she was pledging allegiance. But I hope you will understand times runs differently for an old woman who's ringing death's doorbell. Oh, poor Granny Eve, breathed Ida. Their grandmother was sitting on the foot of Ma Myrtle's bed. She looked pale and worn out. My dear Evie says I should stop holding the family in suspense, said Ma Myrtle. She says it's time I do what I mean to do. The room broke out in excited whispers. Well, that's the truth, Ida muttered. Ma Myrtle held up a hand to quiet the relatives, then said into the silence, In 18 days, Blue was gripping the windowsill so tightly his knuckles hurt, you will all be a part of my grand review. Eve looked at her sharply. What? Said Blue. Ida was trembling so hard he could feel the hose underneath them vibrating. She's not telling us which crescent moon will be red? Or how to find the alligator? Or... Ma Myrtle lifted her arms into the air triumphantly. A couple of people clapped, but Blue could tell they didn't understand any better than he did. Ma Myrtle's lips pursed. The grand review, she said, will be a display of our family's many aptitudes, a day of merriment and mirth in honor of my life. It will stave off the sadness you will no doubt endure when I leave you. Oh, Granny Eve looks mad now, whispered Ida. I think Ma Myrtle's changed the plan on her. Blue was counting in his head. 18 days. Ma Myrtle was supposed to die in 19 days. Dear sweet Ma Myrtle, said Chelsea, hovering near her chair, what is a grand review? It's another talent contest, Howard said, crossing his arms over his chest. Of course. Chelsea's face brightened at once. She was no doubt already planning a new lineup of songs and dances for her son. The grand review is not a talent contest, Ma Myrtle said. It's a festival, a celebration, a showcase of everything that makes this family great. Yep, said Howard. It's a talent contest. At the grand review, Ma Myrtle said, talking over him, all of Murky Branch will witness what our family can do, and I will announce the name of the champion who has proved himself or herself worthy of a new fate. Ida, said Blue. His cousin turned to look at him. In the light from the window, he could see that she was close to tears. You've got to do it, he breathed. Before the review. What? It's the only way to convince her to call the whole thing off, Blue said. If we can break your fate. Ida shook her head. No, I told you I can't. A grand review, said Blue. "In this family, people are going to end up burned and electrocuted and trampled and who knows what else." Ida bit her lip. "And it will keep all the relatives here for weeks, when all Granny Eve wants is some time alone with her mother." Blue hadn't quite thought of it that way, but Ida was right. Granny Eve must want a chance to say goodbye to Ma Myrtle. "We can do this," he said, watching her with bated breath. "I know we can." "You say we," she murmured at last, "but you really mean is me." "You'll do it?" She slumped against the wall of the house and sighed. "I really hate gerbils." Chapter 25. Waiting. The next few days were a blur of activity. Invitations went out to everyone in Murky Branch, welcoming them to attend Ma Myrtle's grand review. It would, the invitation said, include live music, a poetry recital, fireworks, victuals, a three-legged race, and a swamp cake eating contest, among other entertainments. The general consensus in town was that it would be a catastrophe, and also the most spectacular event of the year. Tumble had encouraged Ma Myrtle to include the swamp cake contest. If Operation Rebellion failed, then Howard would be their last chance. "All he has to do is beat Baggett flat at eating his own famous swamp cakes. Ma Myrtle will love it, and she'll tell Howard how to find the alligator. Then he can tell your grandmother, and that will be something at least." Blue thought it was a good idea. The twins were happy to have a backup plan. All of them agreed that it was only fair for Howard to contribute his strange talent to their effort. All of them, except for Howard. When he saw the invitations, he yelled so much about being forced to perform against his will that he made Ida burst into tears, which made Jenna threaten to sick the gerbellion on him. He had retreated to his room, locked and electrified his door, and refused to come out except at mealtimes. The rest of them continued their preparations without him, but Blue made a point of kicking Howard's door every time he walked by, just to let him know what he thought of his behavior. As for the Wilsons, not much had changed. Tumble's mother was still repairing everything she could get her hands on, though she had finally agreed to hire roofers to fix the leaks. Her father had finished his coconut shampoo jingle and started working on a new one for a company that made road flares. The Wilsons had always carried road flares in their RV in case they drove up on a car that had broken down, but the samples the company sent them were spectacular. They were nearly as long as Tumble's arm, and when her father lit one to see how it worked, it burned for more than half an hour. The flame was guaranteed not to go out even in the heaviest of rainstorms. Tumble added one to her emergency backpack. She thought Maximal Star would definitely approve. Jenna trained the gerbellion. Ida trained herself not to fear gerbils. Blue called his father and got no answer. Tumble slept in the RV every night, and every morning she sneaked back into the house. Her mother opened the mailbox one day to find a letter in a star-studded silver envelope. She put it on Tumble's bed. Then, after a moment's thought, she picked it back up. Silver stars winked up out of the Wilsons' trash can. The moon, passing out at its crescent phase, and growing fuller, gazed down on the heart of the swamp, waiting. Chapter 26. A Knack for Trouble. Tumble perched on one of the low posts of Goat Flat's dock and watched her mother tinker with the John boat motor. It had taken 3 hours and a lot of muttering, but she seemed to think the motor would work. Goat had hovered over the whole process, thanking Tumble and her mother every few minutes, while Millie asked Tumble not very subtle questions about Howard. When Tumble mentioned that Howard was going to defeat Millie's father in a swamp cake eating contest, she clapped her hands together and spun in a happy circle. "Oh, Daddy'll be so excited," she said. "He's always said you can judge a person's quality by their appetite." "Well," Tumble said dubiously, "I guess that makes Howard really high quality. You should come by and help us all with the gerbils. He'll be there." Tumble figured setting Millie up with Howard might be worth 1/2 of an X. It wasn't terribly heroic, but she was so close to her goal that she couldn't afford to be picky about the projects she took on. "Lily, focus," her mother said. "What's this piece called again?" Tumble stared at the whatchamacallit. She didn't care much about motors, but they had been playing this game all afternoon, and it seemed to please her mother. The chokey? Close. The choke. And what does it do? You have to pull it out to start the engine? Said Tumble. She slapped at a mosquito that had just bitten her arm. When it's cold, her mother said. Right, said Tumble. When the engine's cold, you have to choke it. Her mother had started to complain about how much time she spent over at the Montgomerys, so when she had invited Tumble to come with her today, it had seemed best to go along. And except for the mosquitoes, and the fact that the back of her neck was sunburned, it had been okay. There wasn't much planning left to do for the Operation Rebellion anyway. It was scheduled for the next day, with everything already arranged. Besides, Goat was so glad they'd come. This is wonderful, he said breathlessly. Just wonderful, Mrs. Wilson. Tumble and her mother exchanged glances and tried not to laugh. Goat sounded like someone who was watching a baby being born instead of someone who was having his favorite fishing boat repaired. He had taken Tumble down to the sandbar earlier and shown her the aluminum canoe that he had been using to catch fish ever since his motor quit. It's tippy, he said. You don't want to take a dip in the Okefenokee. Dangerous stuff. No, thank you, ma'am. He had looked sadly at the narrow, silvery boat. And sometimes my old ticker just doesn't want to do so much paddling. He'd also shown Tumble his chest freezer, which was filled with fish and swamp cakes. Goat said any flat that didn't love swamp cakes deserved to be disowned. He gave her a pint bag full of frozen blueberries to eat, while her mother lectured about chokes and propellers. And what's this? Her mother asked again, pointing to a more mysterious part of the outboard. Uh-oh. Tumble decided that the best course of action was to change the subject. How do you know so much about boats anyway? They can't be much like RVs. Very different. But a motor is a motor, and I'm happy to get my hands on it. Just like she was happy to get her hands on plugs and light fixtures and soggy rotten carpet. But how did you learn it all? We've all got our own thing, I guess, her mother said, sitting back on the dock and reaching up with a dirty hand to take the last blueberry from Tumble. Grandpa Laffy's good at running his business. Your Aunt Susan had such a wonderful talent for singing. I've always had a knack for repair work. Tumble gasped and fell off the post. Lily! Her mother was on her feet in a blink. I'm okay, said Tumble, scrambling upright before Millie or Goat could try to help. Her teeth hurt from cracking together when she hit the dock. Just lost my balance, you guys. Nothing weird. Her mother grabbed her chin and peeled her eyelids back, as if invisible brain injuries might speak to her from the inside of Tumble's eyeballs. I'm good, said Tumble. Seriously. She felt bright with understanding. Her mother fixed things. Tumble couldn't believe she'd missed it. And if Lafayette still had talents, that means Blue was right. Tumble wasn't fate-free after all. But Blue thought her gift was heroism, and Tumble wasn't sure. Fixing things was easy for her mother. As much as she wished it were different, being a good hero was tough for Tumble. Lily, are you sure you're fine? Mom, what's my knack? What, sweetie? Her mother was doing that cheek-stroking thing she always did when Tumble was hurt. You've got a knack for fixing things, said Tumble, stepping back. What have I got a knack for? Her mother laughed. Getting into trouble, obviously. My little damsel in distress. She said it fondly. You're going to have a bruise on your chin after that fall. Getting into trouble. It was like her mother had hit a switch. All of the brightness left Tumble in an instant. The bleachers, the shoplifter, almost falling out of the Montgomery's pecan tree. Jason. Tumble reached into her pocket to wrap her fingers around the plastic bag. That can't be it, she said, shaking her head. Mom, that can't be my knack. Her mother smiled. Of course not, sweetheart. I was only teasing. You're so smart. You're good at so many things. Damsel in distress. The words settled in Tumble's gut, and unlike Blue's assurances that she was a hero, they had the feel of rock-solid truth.